On today's podcast of Data for All, we dive into how you can jumpstart your data career. Welcome to the Data for All podcast. I'm Charlie Apigian.
And I'm Charlie Yuley, where we want to empower you to think different with data. And on today's podcast, we're discussing how you can start your career in data.
Yeah, and what we want to do first is identify what we mean by a data career. Is it data science, analytics, or just data literacy? And the method for learning the skills needed.
And today, to help us with this topic, is the very talented and knowledgeable Lindsey Clark. Welcome, Lindsey. Tell us a little bit about your data journey.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie and other Charlie, for inviting me here today.
Thank you.
Definitely a pleasure. So my data journey, wow. You know, when I was preparing for this podcast, I was sitting and thinking, have I ever really defined my data journey? I don't know that I have. So what I would really kind of describe my data journey as is really being involved very heavily in data from a young age. I was very interested and very good at mathematics when I was in high school. Mm-hmm. And that kind of led me into majoring in engineering. So I went through a very traditional track in terms of education, attended the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, got a BS in engineering there, chemical engineering, and then went on to graduate school at Vanderbilt. And you know, I think all of those educational experiences were, even though it was before data science really even started, I think it's fair to say that all of the different curriculum that you experience there has to do a lot with data. You're collecting data, you're learning about data, you're learning how to interpret it. Mm-hmm. So really that concept has been around for quite a while. And so after I left Vanderbilt, I had various jobs within academia. I also worked as an engineer for a while. And honestly, I struggled with my career. I think that's part of the reason that I advocate for different careers today and really try to help and mentor students. And so it kind of ended up that I returned to Nashville in 2011 and took a postdoc at Vanderbilt. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I wasn't thinking at the time, I want to be a data scientist. Mm-hmm. But I knew that I wanted to do more programming. I had kind of gotten away from that. I was doing a lot of bench science at the time. And so that's really the time of my life that I started my journey of networking and really becoming involved in the data community. I started sort of being involved in meetups. Mm-hmm. I was giving talks at different meetups and different symposiums locally in Nashville. And what ended up happening, it was kind of organic. It really wasn't sort of an intentional thing. But I ended up meeting a chief data officer at the first startup company that I worked for. She came to Vanderbilt to do a career talk. And I was just very interested in kind of the startup space, what they were doing. I actually asked her if I could come to their company to shadow. They were at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center at the time.
And was that Axial?
That was at Axial.
Okay.
They are now Wayspring, so just wanted to kind of clarify that. So I ended up going down there. It was very informal. I would go down there just maybe half a day, sort of go to meetings, kind of see what they're doing. It ended up that they wanted me to do a little bit of work for them. I didn't know at the time, but startup companies are very hungry. And so I was actually teaching myself Python on the side. Mm-hmm. I kind of had this idea in my mind at the time that I was going to stay in academia and do some open source programming for drug metabolism. Mm. And so I kind of had that in my mind. And so I started doing this kind of like organic shadowing of a startup company. And they gave me access to their database, which was Google BigQuery. And so I had never written a line of SQL in my life, so I had to sort of self-teach in terms of how am I going to interact with the database, how am I going to pull this data. And so I really just kind of learned organically in that way. I can't really describe it in any other way. So I did that for a few months. Again, it was extremely informal. I had created some analyses for the company, done a few graphs. It was very kind of low-level stuff. And they ended up getting a Series B round of funding about 3 months later. And I remember approaching them in the parking lot And I said, I don't want to be presumptuous, but I'm actually looking to transition out of my postdoc. I had been doing it for 4 years, and I would be interested in full-time work if you're interested in that. And, they kind of shook their head. It was late at night. It was like 11 o'clock, right? And so I didn't really know what would come of it. But 2 weeks later, they offered me a full-time job as a senior data scientist.
How very proactive of you.
Right?
Yes. So that was when you went into your actual professional career.
That's right.
Can I ask you a couple of questions about the academic side, going back to, when you were in high school even? You had a love for engineering. You came to that area. Were there a lot of females that were also with you, or were you kind of alone in that?
That's a great question. I think I was kind of alone, to be honest. Certainly women in STEM is a hot topic, I think, even today. We really try to advocate for more diversity in engineering and other types of sciences. I'll be honest, I don't know if I was just kind of young and naive, but I didn't really think about it much at the time. I was sort of I had kind of tunnel vision that I'm going to go to university. I opened, at the time it was in the late 90s. I hate to age myself, but your college
you're so old, I tell you. Yeah.
Your college catalog, it was still a print catalog, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, I get that in the mail. I open it up. BS in chemical engineering is listed, and then they say semester 1, semester 2, semester 3, on until you've accrued 132 hours to get your degree. And
right.
I hate to say it, but really all I did was just follow the recipe that they had in the book, and I finished college.
Yeah.
So there were definitely not a lot of women in my degree program, and I don't really know that I felt that very much at the time, to be honest. I think sort of my role as a female in a very heavily male-dominated field kind of came a little bit later. So, again, I don't know if it was really just because I was really just trying to complete my degree and I was very focused on that. But, I think later on, as I became more involved in our data community, through the Technology Council, through, meetups that I've been involved with, it's definitely been really something that I've focused on is mentoring female students and sort of helping them find their way in terms of navigating what is traditionally a very male-dominated field.
Yeah, and I think that's important because obviously today's topic is about jumpstarting a career and focusing on it from K all the way through professional. I think is really important for us to do here today. And your perspective on that, I think, is really important. But we got to the point where you started in the professional area, and I know that you've had a very short because you're so you've had a great start to your career, and obviously have been a leader in the data community here. Not only in Nashville, but now in the state, now that you're actually residing in Knoxville. So tell us a little bit about that journey as well. Yeah,
that's a really interesting journey. Comes up a lot because I currently serve as director of data science. So when I started at Axial as a senior data scientist, it's what we call an individual contributor role, right? You're not managing people. You're not too much involved in what I would call like overall data science strategy or company strategy. You're more of the kind of the tactical person who executes on projects. And so I did that actually only for about 9 months and was promoted to director, probably for all the wrong reasons, right? I was a really good individual contributor. I was really good at what I do. And so, they promoted me to director. And suddenly I was really kind of thrust into this position where suddenly I wasn't the person making the graphs. I wasn't the person writing the SQL to pull data out of the databases. I was the person who was having to communicate with the C-suite. I was having to set strategy. I was having to make a team budget. They don't teach you how to do that.
That's when the fun stuff started.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I really think my promotion to director actually set me on a path toward being deeply involved in the data community because It was actually a very lonely time. Like, I don't think we talk about this enough, but you feel very vulnerable. Sometimes you don't really have the support you need, only because maybe you don't know what to ask for, right? You don't really know what you don't know. And I think luckily for me, about a year after that, I guess it was, that's when I went through the Emerging Leaders in Technology program at the National Technology Council.
I've heard of that one.
Absolutely. The other Charlie has definitely heard of that one.
That Charlie, not me. Yeah, that's right. They don't let me in the emerging leaders because I'm the declining leader, I guess, is what it really is.
Wah, wah, wah,
Yeah. He really feels sorry for me. Can you tell?
I can tell. Yes, it's palpable. So, not to be too dramatic, but that was a real watershed moment, kind of turning point in my career. That program really gave me sort of the information. It kind of really let me know that I wasn't alone. Like what I was feeling and experiencing was very normal. And a lot of other people were going through it. And so really just being in a room with other people who were having the same experiences and having the same challenges and having us talk through specific solutions that we could go back to our companies and implement was really life-changing for me. So I think after that, it really kind of stuck in my mind that maybe this is where I need to be. I was kind of missing actually doing the data science piece, but I kind of started feeling like, hey, I'm actually good at this. I'm actually good at leading a team.
The birth of a leader.
Absolutely. And so, that was really how that evolution went. And then we don't also talk about this enough, but after I left Axial, I was actually hired again into a senior data scientist position, which, I think on the surface feels like a step back. But it actually really wasn't. I think that's actually a very common thing, particularly if you are moving to a company that doesn't have a data science team at all. I was actually the first data science that Blue Book ever hired. So, once that happened and, some changes happened at the company, we went through a merger and acquisition a couple of years ago, or actually maybe last year. And so after all of that occurred, I was promoted to director again. So I moved back into a leadership role last year and now manage a team of 2. So I think I'm doing it better this time around, or at least I hope I am.
Absolutely. We always learn from that first or second time, and that is a great experience to be able to have.
Right.
And I think that path is really interesting. I think, Charlie, as we start this conversation about, data skills, data careers, what I love about what we have here, and by the way, there's so much more to Lindsey than just being a data scientist, which Charlie and I have had the pleasure of knowing Lindsey for many years and seeing her be an advocate for data, an advocate for STEM, so much more than just the data science role. But we all three, what we've noticed is that we all three have a different perspective on what it takes to get into a data career. So let's set that up. So Charlie, think about what your path has been to get here. And so what kind of perspective do you have that might be a little bit different than the journey that Lindsey has had?
Well, so to start off with, I was terrible at the maths. Like when I was growing up, I used to think like I'm just bad at math. And realistically, I never applied myself in it because every time I did try, I could get it. Like my first stats class in college, which was the first kind of class I started to enjoy with regards to math and whatnot. Like I did really well. I got an A in the class, and that was psychology stats though, so it wasn't like real deal stats. And so I took that to mean like I'm really good at stats, so I should try engineering stats. Terribly, terribly wrong. I believe I got a 20 on the first test.
Well, maybe there was a curve.
It was a little bit. You were supposed to have Cal 1 through 4, and I had Cal 0.
Okay.
And so I was learning integrals and all that kind of stuff like on the fly. Like after the first test, I learned it, and luckily he let us retest. And I wound up with a B in the class, but it was a lot more work than I had previously thought. But looking back on it, I was mentioning it earlier when we were trying to define this whole thing, and we were just like, stop. We gotta say this on air or whatnot. But like I feel like stats it's an entry level approach to data, numbers, and stuff like that, and that it can get you over that first hurdle. Like if you don't know anything about data, it's like, where do I even start? But stats can give you a path. It's not the path, but it's a path. And for me, that's what it was. And then after college, I didn't really do anything with data specifically for several years until I got to the place I am right now. And so I was hired as a help desk agent and worked really hard and started to get promoted, and then started working with our systems. And our systems, like we've got it's a call center, and so we've got data that's being spit out like faster than you can keep up with it. And you and I were talking before earlier as well about getting into data and just living in the moment. And that's essentially what I did for months and months and months. Yeah. I learned every single metric, and I learned every single correlation. Well, not every single, but I learned as many correlations as I could to a behavior that I wanted to achieve, and then, and a couple other goals in there. And so that's when I really found out or discovered data for myself, because then I started applying it to my personal life and all this other kind of stuff. And we mentioned this in other podcasts as well. And so I won't go to it too far. But for me, it was eye-opening to learn how effective you can be if you can apply data appropriately.
Yeah, and I think, so we've got Lindsey that came up through the academic route, but really started her data career in the professional area. You coming up the ranks in a unique way, Charlie, and of course I take the academic route to get there. But the truth is, I turned into an academic at the age of 30, and from 22 to 30, I worked in the car industry and did data. And so I had that experience before I got into it. But I think the perspective for today is going to be that I have seen hundreds of, it feels like thousands, because it really has been thousands of students come through the education space and seeing their paths and knowing that not everybody takes the exact same path. Not everybody's good at the same thing, but they're all getting into an aspect of data, and all of them are good. If you have a passion for it, if you have a knack for it, or if you just like solving problems and that happens to be what you're able to do. So I think the three of us having different perspectives is going to be good for that. So let's open it up then to what do we mean when we say a career in data?
Well, before we jump into that though,
sure.
Other Charlie, I feel like you.
We're going there today. Is that it? We're going with the gauntlet today.
She started it.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to say that again and again.
And so we're trying to figure out in today's podcast who's the other Charlie, I guess is what we're trying to say.
We're starting the argument.
I am convinced that the Charlie on the other side is the better Charlie. He's better looking, taller, even though he's from rural Mississippi, he has that against him. But I'm the up and coming guy. I'm the little itty bitty Armenian that is just wanting to do good. And so we're trying to figure it out today. I'm sorry.
You're human labeling data now.
I am human labeling data. That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
So other Charlie, you failed to mention that you have a PhD and what it was in and how you made the transition from not knowing data to knowing data, because you started with the job in automation.
Yeah, and I don't want to bore our folks here because they've heard a little bit of this obviously so far. But yes, I did take and I think it's appropriate to say, I really felt like I was a data scientist, and but really a statistician early on, teaching statistics. I took every PhD level statistics course I could. I loved it. It was my thing. And I taught that for 20 years. I still teach it. But what I'm noticing, it's probably what you're noticing as well, Lindsey, is what I really enjoy is communicating data. And so I don't talk in data science terms that much anymore. I'm more interested in, what does it take to solve a problem? How do we take data, turn it into insight, then to action? And it's the same stuff I continually will say. So I don't use, I don't talk machine learning models as much as I talk about the other stuff. So I feel like I've done the same thing where I get to it, I get immersed in it. And yes, the transition from statistics to data science, I had to do it on my own because everybody just assumed I was good at it. And behind the scenes, I'm like, well, I'm a professor. They can't actually know. I have to learn things. and so then I had to become a programmer because I had to use Python to be able to do this stuff. And I'm like, I don't want people to know that I don't know how to do this. So I had to do all that on my own. So I do have the perspective of what is it what can you learn on your own? What you need to experience, and what can you learn in a classroom? And again, an N equals 1 here. I'm just sample of 1 here, but I feel like I understand those different components pretty well, and I've seen a lot of students do it. So yes, Charlie, that is true, and thanks for stroking my ego a little bit there.
No problem, Dr. Charlie.
Oh, well, there you go. So let's get into the fun of today and really frame what is the talk, and that is we're talking about a career in data. Notice we didn't say data science. We said a career in data. So, Lindsey, of course, since you're the guest today, what do you think it means to be in a career in data?
Wow, that's so broad. There's so many things in my mind right now. Part of what is really kind of coming to my mind first is that data's everywhere now, right? Especially with the advent of smartphones and, a lot of our commerce being done online now. It's hard to find somebody who's not touched by data in some way, no matter what you do.
Data for all, right?
I don't think it's possible.
It's not possible. And, as we were kind of talking about our different paths, I really started thinking about what is the common correlation? What is the leading indicator that's common among the three of us in terms of how we got where we are? And I don't know exactly. I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's sort of antithetical to how we think about correlations and data and prediction, right? But it seems like the common thing is an appreciation and an understanding that data is actually really important and can be used for really cool and good things.
I like that a lot. That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah. I feel personally that a career in data could mean a lot of things, and I would even go beyond the list that you gave in the beginning of the podcast, which was data analyst, data scientist, data engineer. Yeah, here's the list: database, statistics research. All of these things, right? I would even go beyond that to if you work for an analytics company, I think if you are part of the executive leadership team, if you are in account management. I mean, there's really no specific type of role that I think data doesn't touch somehow. But, I think from a not traditional sense, but from where we are today, I think that most people believe that a career in data is somewhere along the spectrum of data intake all the way up through data reporting and communication and everything that goes in between that, which is your data scientists, it's your data analysts, it's your machine learning engineers, it's your data engineers. All of that, those different titles encompass sort of this process from data collection all the way through insights.
And we even like to say even through action, because insights do not move the needle until you tell a story with it to compel others to do things.
That's right. Yeah. So, that's kind of how I think about it today. And I think it's important to mention that I believe that line of thinking is continually evolving. Like if we were to repeat this podcast 3 years, 5 years from now, we might think about it a little bit differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which, thinking differently about data, right?
Yeah. So which brings us to you've actually made it sound like it's more of a mindset as opposed to a skill.
It's absolutely a mindset. The other Charlie and I were talking before the podcast.
The other Charlie happens to be Charlie Yielding at this
she pointed at me this time.
Yes. We got to make sure that the people at home know that.
Clarity for our listeners, yes. So we were thinking about we were talking about documentaries, right? And how kind of snippets of things that people say we relate to our data lives and relate to business. I've been doing that a lot lately. And, one thing that come up was I was watching this documentary and this guy mentioned shedding the inherited thinking. It was actually about psychedelics, right? Which is, off topic. But
next podcast.
It struck me that I'm like, wow, that really applies to my data life so much, right? Because you have to think about what is the data telling you? You have to suspend things that you know about the world, about correlations, and you really have to look at the data from as much as you can I won't say an unbiased way because I think everyone has bias. But I think that's the art of what you learn in sort of formalized education and even sort of alternative ways that we get educated now, which is self-learning, boot camps, things like that. I loved the concept of shedding the inherited thinking. Anyway, it really stuck with me.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really does play to the idea of the mindset. And so let me, I think let's at this point take the difference of education as opposed to skills, because we want people to understand that we're not just talking about Python programming skills, and that's what it's going to take to have a different mindset. When we say education, and we've had these conversations many times over the years, education is different than skills. So when we say education, what we're saying is you have problem-solving skills. You can learn on your own. You know how to fail and then take lessons learned to be able to become a better person. You can communicate. You work well in a team. And then if you're in the data world, you can think logically and use that logic to make better decisions. So it's not as clear-cut as a specific class. It's you maturing as a person almost is an education. And that education does not mean degrees. I know the professor just said that, but of course I believe in that. Where skills can then be the hard stuff, right? It can be statistics. It can be Python programming or whatever type of programming of choice. So having those types of differences. So getting back to the mindset then when we say education and when it comes to data, I know it sounds like we're being too general or too much out there, but how do you get that education then becomes really important to the person that's just sitting there. Because the truth is, if we're talking to somebody that doesn't think they're in the data space, they could be already educated. They just need some skills to pivot into a new career.
Well,
Right.
so let me ask a question then, because I just took stats in college and whatnot. And so what percentage of data scientists in the workforce today went to school for data science?
Wow. I don't know the percentage.
If you had to guess, a lot?
I would say 5%.
At most.
I feel like it's the same way because Charlie and I had the conversation. I've had a conversation in the past about aptitude versus interest. And part of the reason we're doing this is because we're bringing interest to the table and setting it down and saying, look at this thing right here with regards to data. But it feels like everybody has to, to Charlie's other point is they have to find their own path. Like we found our own path to the place that we're at, but it's not through any kind of structured way.
Right.
But that's becoming more prevalent though, right? And so what does the standard like real education path look like?
Oh, so you throw it to the education guy. Let me be very real on this topic today because this isn't going to be a commercial for education today or for universities. It is going to be helping the person at home that wants to get started in a data career. The truth is, even the 5% that have been educated are in programs that are in beta. They're just starting out. Nobody says they're correct. We're just, a lot of times you're taking the stat class plus the programming class and saying you're a data scientist. So we're trying to figure it out in the higher ed space right now. So everybody has a weird path to get into data science today. Sure. So then it becomes, what are the intangibles that are part of your education? And I'll tell you, I'll take somebody from a music college if they have the right logic. We know how many friends that are programmers are now data scientists that started off as a drummer or a lead guitarist. So we know that's the case. So creativity is also something. So you have to think about the skills that when you add the data component to that would make a really good data enthusiast or professional.
Yeah. I had the interest and then YouTube taught me the skills.
Really? Wow. When you made more of a transition into the professional career, what did you use? Or did you just kind of play around?
That's a great question. So from an educational standpoint, most of my programming experience was in MATLAB. Okay. And from a syntax standpoint, that's very close to Python. So that's really why I chose Python to kind of focus on and sort of my self-continuous learning. I started with Coursera. It was a class called Python for Everybody.
Yep. I watched
That was
I
the
did
first
too.
one. Dr. Chuck, really
Absolutely.
great guy. And so I really just started there. And then it's amazing how much it snowballs because you start learning sort of the structure of the language. And then you start to, I think one of the most underrated skills we don't talk about is the ability to intuit. Like, can you kind of abstract some experience or something you've learned and apply it to a new problem?
Oh, that's a great way of saying it.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of these intangibles that I look for in the hiring process that we really don't talk about that much. But so that's how I did it. I started with Coursera, so kind of online MOOCs, I guess, and then I transitioned to YouTube. I think YouTube is definitely a great resource to learn programming. MIT's OpenCourseWare in data science is fantastic. Also, our best statistics friend Josh Starmer in StatQuest,
StatQuest.
best one,
Double bam.
double bam.
Yeah, I mean, and
Do you
these
know what
are
that is, Charlie? Other Charlie?
No, I'm out of the loop on this one.
Okay, well, we're going to have to introduce that to
if
other
we
Charlie.
do anything good today, it is to get people to follow Josh Starmer
Absolutely.
on YouTube, and that is StatQuest. Honestly, you'll hear a jingle, you'll learn something about.
StatQuest.
That's right. But there's so many of those different things out there. I think what's important is let's take the journey of somebody. So let's start with the traditional route, and that's the 18-year-old that's graduating from high school, and they maybe did or did not get a little bit of a flavoring of the data world. And I think the reason for a formal education, I'm going to say formal education, not 4-year degree, is it's hard to get started. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get the intangibles and then the technical skills to become a data-worthy professional. And so a lot of times having that structure really helps. So you go through a program, because when we started with, Coursera courses, you're seeing 50 different things about the same topic. And I spent a month sometimes watching a course and then saying, I just wasted a month because that wasn't the right thing. Well, what if you're 18 years old and you wouldn't have, that same thing? So having a path kind of given to you is really helpful, I think, for somebody that is not educated. So they learn the education components too. They learn how to write better. They learn how to communicate better. They do teamwork in other courses. They take history. The liberal arts mentality is so that you become a well-rounded individual. And a well-rounded individual usually is a better educated person. And then you start layering on the tech skills and the other skills that they need in their last couple of years after they get a little bit of education. And that is kind of the normal traditional route that we call a 4-year degree, or something that is a 4 to 6 year process. 8 years if it's one of your buddies that probably spent way too much time there. But that's the normal traditional route. Like what we just said, and you heard earlier, is most of us didn't take the traditional route to get to this. So then let's talk about that non-traditional person. And let's start with the person that already has an education. And I'm going to say education can be experiences too. So I firmly believe that my father was educated, but it was 10 years of working in different jobs. So we have an educated person. They have never thought they could ever be in a data career. What would be some of the things that they would need to do to get started?
Well, I think to your point, I think traditional education is really changing a lot. And, from a person who's taught classes, there's almost nothing I can teach a student that isn't readily available somewhere online these days, right?
Be quiet. Don't tell people that. Don't ruin the mojo.
So, the way that I like to think about it, so one thing that I believe has emerged in what you're talking about is that it's not very formulaic, right? But I think that we can sort of categorize it in things that a person can do in their life that will actually put them on this path. And it's not going to be quite linear. But you kind of have to trust the process a little bit, right? So I like to think about it in terms of first credentialing, right? What types of formalized education do you think you need in order to get to where you want to go? Okay, for some people that might be a 4-year degree. Okay, but we're talking about people who might already have a 4-year degree potentially. It could be that you go to a boot camp, like a Nashville Software School or something like that. It could be that you choose to go an online certification route, like AWS, Google. I'm sure there's a lot of others. So you make the decision about what you want to do there. I think the second piece in terms of how you spend your time is networking. Like get out and talk to people and do it all the time. I can't stress that enough. I mean, just the sheer act of immersing yourself in the community, setting up coffees with people, meeting people, that's going to go a long way, I think, in getting people to where they want to go in terms of their data journey and data career.
Well, just to jump in real quick, the biggest part of your story, or a large part of your story, was you talking to people.
Absolutely.
And opening doors and figuring things out.
Yeah, I realize I have a STEM degree already, but I think 90% of the reason that I got that first data science role is because I forged a relationship with people, right?
Nice.
I mean, it's just the reality. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. I was sort of immersed in what they were doing. I did a little work for them, and it just kind of happened organically. I think the third piece is what I kind of call personal branding. I think people don't really do this enough sometimes. Go out and agree to give a talk at a meetup and record it and put it on your LinkedIn. Think about starting a blog. One of the easiest things you can do is start creating content on LinkedIn and talking about data science, talking about other types of data careers that you're interested in and sort of what's going on in the field. I think those are intangibles, not in terms of like skills that you would take to a business, but they're intangibles in terms of career development that I think could really put people on the track they need.
Yeah. So in doing that, because we're creating content, I've created content in the past.
We're doing this now, yes.
but you really have to dive into it. And so if you're going to write a blog about something, I mean, some people will, but if you're going to do it right, you've got to dive into it, figure out the top and bottom of the current definition and how you explain that and what position you're coming from. So it shows aptitude, but you have to build that aptitude just to get to that point.
Right. And, I think you do that by reading, you do it by listening to podcasts. Yep. I'm sorry, is that
Please
a shameless plug?
Please do that, folks.
And a thing you could get started, and I've seen this, people, they're very young, they don't know much yet, and maybe they blog about their own career journey, right? They just talk about what they're doing, maybe their challenges, some solutions. Like, no matter how inexperienced you are, you always have something to offer, I think, to the community. And I truly believe that.
Yeah. So let's take a step back from that. I am the 28-year-old that started my career. It was just okay. I'm not inspired. I think data is my calling. I don't know how to get started. So I'm not going to start by, branding myself yet. I'm just wanting to know what to do. Is the right first step reaching out to a Lindsey Clark?
I think so, yes. My opinion is yes. Before you invest any time or money in like online courses or something like that, I think get out in the community and talk to people, get advice. You're gathering data, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, it's practicing the true data-driven craft that, you're wanting to move towards. So I think that's absolutely the best way. You can always learn from other people. I do it all the time. I set up coffees with people, and a lot of times I won't really have a specific goal in mind. I really just want to talk to them. I want to see what they're doing. I want to learn about their company or whatever. And I would say most of the time that always pays off. I always learn something from that hour that I spent and that cup of coffee that I bought for that person.
It's perspective.
Absolutely.
For sure.
and that person that you meet with, you give them somebody they can connect with.
Yes.
But you're right. The best data in the beginning is to hear other people's experiences. And it's not probably from the professor, right? Because what do we want? We want to get you into the class. And we're always going to think that education, which is the right approach. But I've had so many people come to me in the past where they're in their mid-30s, they're an educated person, they've been working in the data area, and they're like, I want to come back and get a 4-year degree in analytics. And I'm like, or what about a master's? Or what about a boot camp? Because do you really want to come back for 3 to 4 years of full time? Because most of your credits are not going to transfer from your liberal arts degree. And so we find a different path for them so that in 2 years they can go out with a credential. I think that's really important for people to understand. Don't always just assume you have to go back for that extra stuff, because if all they need is the skills, then get the skills.
Right.
And so let's talk about those skills. When we say skills, it usually falls into statistics or programming or things like that. And here's the question I know, Lindsey, you get all the time, I get is, I have to learn one of these first. Which one is best to start with? What is the first thing? If I'm going through a traditional program or something and I can't get all of it, should I learn the math and the stats first before I get into the programming? And what are some of your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, I certainly think that there is what I would call kind of a core competency of sorts that I think most people identify a data science or a data analyst role as having, right? I see this on blogs all the time. There's just so much content out there about it. So you commonly see things like knowing maybe up to some intermediate SQL, right? Knowing
SQL,
a regression
by the way,
model
is structured query language.
Right.
It is basically a programming language for databases.
Right, exactly. So knowing some basic to intermediate SQL, knowing regression, knowing 2 to 3 machine learning methodologies pretty well, at least to the point where you can quickly implement them, knowing some basics around database design, and maybe that's about it, right? And so you see often these kind of laundry lists of, if you want to be a data scientist, these are the skills you need. And then I think where the gap happens is, to your point, Charlie, I don't know exactly what you called it, but maybe skills or intangibles maybe. I think it kind of gives the perception that, if me being a functioning data scientist out in the wild means I build models for companies, period. And we know already that is not the case. And I think that's confusing for a lot of students and a lot of people getting started.
And I think we when we talk about data, we need to kind of set up that there are different pathways even in academia. And so there's more of the hard science side of it, which is the data science role.
Right.
But in a college of business, usually that's analytics or and usually it's more about taking data and turning it into an insight, which a lot of times is just visualizations, as more or less. And then you just have the person that needs data for their career. So we want to make sure that we're spanning all of those. In terms of the data science side of things, you always hear of that. Of course, you need your statistics, you need your programming. But if you're the analytics person, you don't need as much of the statistics. You need an appreciation for it. You need to, but you go to regression if all you're trying to do is provide insights. You may not, but what you'll need more of is more of the business acumen.
Yes.
The understanding of a business once you get into it. And so every role does have a little bit of an emphasis on different aspects of the whole data spectrum.
I think it's not easy to say things like, you need a statistics class to be a data analyst or to be a data scientist, right?
Yeah.
Because we know that there are plenty of people out there who work in these roles who have never had a formalized statistics class.
Sure.
So to say that you need it, I think, is not accurate. But I think it depends on who you are as a learner. and how you can best prepare yourself or know that you can best prepare yourself. I know that I function very well in a formalized setting. Okay, that's probably the big reason why I have the degrees I have, because I am that type of learner. And so it made sense for me to take that path. I think not everybody is that type of learner, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to figure out what is the best way for you as an individual to get those kind of skills. I mean, do I think you need to know statistics? I mean, I kind of do. I think you need to know basic distributions and things like that, right? You can get that from Josh Starmer on YouTube. You can get it by taking Statistics 101 at Vanderbilt. You can get it from Coursera class, right? There's really a lot of different options. It's really just about how do you build that portfolio where you can get to the point to demonstrate some competencies to an employer for that very first position.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned the formalized learning component. So I'm going to make us play a game. Does that sound fun? We always got to have a little bit of fun in this whole thing. So here's the game.
Are you going to give us statistics questions?
Oh, I should have done that. But instead, it's going to be easy questions that you can actually understand, Charlie, being the other Charlie across the table from me today. So it's the 3 ways to learn. And give me some examples. And we'll start with you, Charlie. And so I think of these as the 3 different ways that you can learn. And so what are the things that you can learn within these 3? So the more formalized way, like in a classroom, is one way to learn. Another way is to learn on your own, usually through some type of online mechanism or delivery. And then the third, of course, is just through experience and having a job or going to something. So experience on your own in a classroom. What are some things that you can learn in a classroom or you need to learn in a classroom? What are things you can learn on your own? And what are some things that you need to experience to be able to get the skills or education component?
So I'll just go from experience. So one of the things I learned in school that was a new concept to me was statistically significant.
Okay.
Just the idea that you can use a measure to say, well, this stands out enough to look at further, or it stands out like, it's 3 standard deviations away, and you're like, holy crap, like we did something wrong, or really, really right.
Right.
And so that's that, and some of the more basic math things are what I picked up in school. But the majority of my learning was a combination of the last 2, because I had the data sets to play with in my job.
Okay.
And so for me, nobody was putting this on me. And so that, I think that helped me a lot, in that, like, nobody told me what the limit was or where to stop or anything like that. And I lived in the data for a long time. Like, and it was really fascinating to me how I would get more insights the more I would look at it. Like, you figure you look at a data set for a certain amount of time and you're done learning stuff from it, and then you learn something else. And so I took a lot of online self-learning, because I'm a self-learner. If you make me sit in a classroom and try to teach to me, it's going to be real tough for me.
Okay.
But from a self-learner perspective, like, I like playing with things, and I would play with something until I have it. But if you tried to teach me the same thing, it wouldn't go well. And so I took all of that. First thing I did was what's a VLOOKUP, and then I had to figure out how to connect 2 different sets of data, and then and what it took to mark the data, so to speak, so you can make those connection pieces. And so I would do one thing, and then I would look at it a different way, and then every time I added on a new set of data, it just led to more and more insights. And so I was able to fine tune what it meant to work as a help desk agent, just through data and tying the behaviors and things like that. And so for me, the vast majority of the education I have came through those.
Okay. So more on your own, and then of course experience and having to do it. But it sounds like the math and stats may have been in a classroom environment. Do you think that was the best way for you to learn that type of stuff? Is that something you can learn on your own?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Like Lindsey said, it's on the internet. And
it is on the internet.
And so I could have, like, if I wanted to go back right now and do a deep dive in statistics, I wouldn't go to the local schools and say, hey, can I take a class this year? I would just look on YouTube, because it's there, it's available. It's like whenever I feel like learning it, I can, and there's no structure around it.
What if you were 20 years old and didn't have the ability to learn? You learned over many years. So let's say you are a 20-year-old. Do you think that's conducive for somebody that's never seen stats before to learn it on their own?
Yeah, I think nowadays, yeah.
Because they're a little different, aren't they? Like me at the age of 20, where I didn't have that, maybe is a little bit different than for the 20-year-old kind of grew up watching videos now because of this thing called COVID that just happened, right? So I think there's something to that. Maybe it is changing.
I intend to raise my kids with self-learning being a primary way that they pick up stuff. It appears like my son is the good in-school student, traditional guy, but my daughter not so much. And so I feel like that's a skill that I have to give to them as they grow up now, but it's never been something that's existed before. But I did go the school route in college. Like I wasted a lot of time and effort in college just trying to figure stuff out. And the whole time, it's like being in a taxi cab. You can see the numbers go up. And I was doing that just while I was like, well, should I be? Initially, it was like a biologist, and then it was a landscape architect, and then a psychologist, and then that's where I started working in a psychology lab, and that professor was all about statistics and data and all that kind of stuff. And he was really picky about how he put all that stuff together. He taught me a ton. And that's when I first got into like, oh, okay, well, it's more than just like numbers and all that kind of stuff. Right. But I never really touched it in the way that, because he would do standard deviation formulas in a cell in Excel.
Right.
And we had,
of course,
I forget what the name of the application was, but other professors would just buy the
actual
software to do that math for him.
Gotcha.
And he was super into it.
And by the way, I don't know if we've mentioned this before. Where did you go for your college degree?
I went to Mississippi State.
Mississippi State. You know, my oldest son went to Mississippi State. I don't know if I ever told you that before.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So as much as I make fun of Mississippi, I'm a proud father of a graduate from Mississippi State. Hail State.
Yeah. Well, you can say that. Being from there, I'm too cool.
Oh, well, I am definitely not too cool. And the real Charlie can say Hail State because I paid a lot of money to be able to say that. And but let's turn it over to Lindsey. When you hear in class, on your own, and experience, what are some of the different things that come up for you?
You know, as the other Charlie was talking, I
that's the Charlie from Mississippi State, by the way.
You know, I think part of what you're highlighting, I think, is some of the limitations of some of the out-of-box analytics and data science tools that we see today, right? When you get that type of exposure to all of the nuances of the mathematics behind what you're doing, then I think you become very critical of the data science models and the numbers and new information that you create for your business. And, you know, I think that's a gap that people need to just be aware of.
Yeah.
Do I think you can learn it online? Yes. Do I think that you need to sit in a classroom? No, of course not. But I think gaining that type of appreciation for what's going on under the hood such that you can evaluate the limitations and the risk to the business of what you're putting out there, I think is a big difference in what I see in terms of like formal education paths versus, someone who's maybe spent 3 months with kind of a short course or something. You don't get that deep dive, right?
That's a really good point because like, as you say that, I think about big picture understanding. So if something doesn't go right or something's off, like you have a better understanding with all that intense mathematical knowledge.
Right.
And you're probably less hesitant to dive into that to figure stuff out.
That's right.
And the same can be said for the business too, right? If you have a deeper understanding of your business, then you understand the mechanisms where things will fail. So from a formal education side, what you have is you're trying to create the foundational stuff without knowing what business you're going to be in.
Right.
And a lot of times if you're looking at a data science route, the math behind the models is where you do get a better comprehension for it, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're really taught to be very critical. I mean, I think that's the benefit, I believe, of a PhD. that you spend a lot of time really tearing down your work. It's a time of intense criticism of what you're creating.
Okay.
And do I think that always translates to business? No. I mean, I think the reality is that even sometimes when we're wrong or we make quote unquote bad models, whatever that might mean, it can still have business value, and you don't really open up risk to people or the business itself all the time. But I think at least having an awareness of that and understanding where it could go wrong is something that I believe that's a skill that I think takes a little more foundational mathematics and statistics than I think, a quick online course can provide.
Yeah,
a good
that's a really
perspective.
good point. Yeah, for sure. And so what are things that you think you pick up really quickly by learning on your own through the online environment, let's say?
To me, programming.
Okay.
So, my bend is, I think if you need mathematics, if you need underlying information about how neural nets work, go to your YouTube for your universities, go to papers, get a little academic for that. But if it's programming, I think there's so many options. I think there's a lot of different programming resources out there. Real Python is a big one that I use a lot. YouTube, of course, all the time. If I want to learn cloud technologies, I always watch a YouTube video on it, right? So to me, that's kind of the differentiator. You also mentioned experience.
Yeah.
To me, that's the best learning mechanism for me right now in my current career. I do think it depends on where you are. When I was starting out, when I was pretty young, I'm learning all the technical stuff. I'm diving deep into data. I'm doing distributions. I'm writing functions in classes. I'm doing all the technical geeky stuff. I feel like for me right now, I value the experiences much more. Like I want to be put in uncomfortable positions at work so I can learn from failure. And for me, just where I am at, that's more valuable as a learning experience currently.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that is very true as you start to mature and get out of your imposter syndrome.
Right.
Because early on, we learn the technical stuff. We keep learning. We dive into it because we always feel like we're a fraud. Like even today, I mean, who says I know anything about data science or data in general? I still feel that way, but I'm not as much. And so now you're right. I like being put into situations. And most of it for me is nothing to do with data, nothing to do with math.
Right.
It is sit down with a company and find out what their problems are and how I can solve them.
That's right.
That's how I get uncomfortable these days.
Yeah.
That to me is something that I think is really worth getting to, but it's hard to do that in the beginning of your career.
Yeah, it's very hard.
So do you have any let's say you are the person that's never learned anything about programming and you wanted to try to learn it on your own. Give a couple of examples of different sites or different YouTubers. Like I used DataCamp back in the day, loved it. And that gave me a little bit of the stats, a little bit of the Python. Is there any other ones that you could give as quick tips?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of all that I've used over the years. I say the years like it's been 50 years. It's only been like 8 years. So Coursera was so when I got started, Coursera was almost the only game in town.
Yep.
There wasn't all the different options that we have today. It's amazing how much it's evolved. So Coursera was a big one for me early on. I have used DataCamp pretty extensively. I liked DataCamp. I have met people who don't learn well on DataCamp. So I think it's important to understand the platform and how they have it arranged, and does that really jive with the way that you consume information and kind of learn, right? Linux Academy is another one. So throughout my data science career, we have used primarily, if not almost exclusively, now that I'm thinking about it, Linux platforms. And so I really had to learn how to use the command line, be comfortable opening my computer terminal. So I've used Linux Academy a lot, and so it's helped me a ton. I think beyond that, Real Python, I already mentioned that.
Yeah.
And then YouTube. I mean, YouTube's probably my favorite. I mean, there's just so much good content on there.
So lately I've been watching more YouTube because Charlie is always talking about how he's on YouTube. So I turned it on yesterday. I'm always like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I feel like I got to watch YouTube because the other Charlie is always telling me about this. And of course I do watch YouTube, but, and I was watching about Budapest, and you say Pest, not pest. And I learned about some of the cultures there. So I'm getting there. And of course I watch my favorite StatQuest videos from there as well. I think we're getting close to wrapping up. I know it goes so quickly, doesn't it?
It really does.
I didn't even get to ask my question.
Well, we're getting there. I didn't want to say we're done. I wanted to say we want to wrap up with a few of them. So Charlie, I'm going to throw it over to you, and then at the end we got to talk about the future of education. But I know you had a couple other questions that you wanted to kind of throw out there.
Well, it kind of ties. The first question is for both of you, and it kind of ties into the point of why we're talking today, and that there's not really one way to determine or to become a data scientist or a data a worker, whatever you want to call them. But you guys are in a unique situation I would say that both of you are on the front end of like how all this works. Like what does a data science job look like in the workforce, and how do you train up data scientists and things like that? Do you appreciate that position, or would you rather be 50 years down the road and just have it handed to you? Like, meaning like at some point this will all be standardized.
Are you saying AI is taking our jobs? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay. It's a good point. I mean, the way that we got here is probably not going to exist in 50 years, right? For various reasons. And I don't know. I mean, it's hard to abstract, past that, right? I personally, even though I think it's been a little bit of a tough road at times, like I would never trade the experiences that I've had, because it's given me all kinds of perspective. It's provided me with numerous examples of where I've gone wrong and hopefully won't repeat in the future. Particularly moving into leadership, that's been really a huge challenge for me, and it still is a challenge. I'm still trying to hone the way that I run teams, the way that I interact with different functional groups across the company. And so I just don't think I could do that as well if I haven't had failures and struggles along the way. So I don't know. For me personally, I don't know that I would really change it.
Oh, and I definitely wouldn't, because I love setting my path as opposed to it being set for me. The biggest reason I moved to my current university is they said, we have no idea what your job's going to be. And I'm like, I'll take it because I love that. And that's probably why I started diving into data science. It was, okay, I get how to do statistics. I've been teaching it for 19 years. Oh my gosh, there's this new shiny object, and I get to be part of creating that here at the university. I loved that. And so I wouldn't change that for anything. And I'm probably not going to be as good at this as somebody else in the future, because they will have filled in all of the stuff that I had to try to figure out through YouTube videos.
Exactly. And I think another thing is, I think sometimes we sort of think about the different pathways as a frustrating part. Like, I think sometimes we talk about it in a little bit of a negative connotation. But I would challenge all of us to rebrand that as actually a good thing for people, right? It's actually a good thing that there are a lot of different options and there's a lot of different paths. It creates that flexibility for you to create your own way that you get to point B, which is a value proposition, right?
To some. Some people want the job that's on the rails and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They just want to come into an already existing body of knowledge, work within that body of knowledge, and go from there. But I feel like the unique opportunity presented now is to determine what that future looks like.
Yeah, I consider that a positive thing. But that's a good point. Maybe some people don't respond to that very well. But, the reality is there's just no checklist that I can provide somebody to get to where I am today if they want my job or if they want to be a data analyst. I can't give them a list, a bulleted list of things to do.
But I dare say that you are you're passing along those hard learned lessons to your
Right.
employees and students.
Absolutely.
And the people that probably have gotten into data science now are okay with creating their own journey. We even started off by saying, what's your data journey? Because we know it's not a linear path. And probably the ones that like the more rigid are your computer scientists today, your programmers. And maybe one day they'll get to be the data scientist that they want. But probably they're picking a specific path for now. And then they'll evolve into who they want, where, we were just literally making it up as we went.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Charlie, do you have, what else you got for us?
I think I'll save it for another time.
Okay, because I do see the question on here, and it's like, that's like 4 episodes worth in one question. How are we going to answer that? So,
Are you having me back? Is that what you're saying?
If you'll come back.
We love that idea,
Absolutely.
of course. And so, we just got the okay that Lindsey's going to come back, and we're going to create the teaser inside of this episode that the question that you had was a pretty good one, and it really will be something that has to be a full episode.
Yeah.
Are you going to say it? You're gonna
No,
say
it's
it.
the Zeigarnik effect.
I don't know what it is.
That's
we've
right.
We've got to create the hype so folks come back and listen
Yes,
to the
teaser.
So folks, you just have to figure out when Lindsey's going to be back, and then you'll know when you see that title and you'll see Lindsey's name that was the question that day. So to sum up, we brought 3 different perspectives on what it takes to get started in your data career, or we're going to say data journey. And there are different career paths. We mentioned what it takes to become a data scientist, what is analytics a little bit, statistics, a little bit of database. But what we really said was data is for everyone. And we understand that everybody's path or journey in the future is going to have some type of data component. There's a difference between education and skills. And we talked a little bit about that, where education's more of the problem solving and intangibles, or maybe more of the hard stuff is the skills that we really want. And then we had a little bit of fun of some different ways that we can learn. And of course, we talked a little bit about credentialing. I always have a hard time talking about that because I sit on one side of that fence. But, of course, there's, if you're coming out as an 18-year-old, everybody's asking you, if you're in high school, the only question you get is, where are you going to school?
Yeah.
And the poor senior in high school. And so everybody is kind of almost forced into that 4-year degree. But I think it's a great thing. I'll always say that if you have to spend 4 years to get educated, wouldn't it be great to do it on a campus environment where you're around individuals like you, and it's about the experience? I always go back to this experience thing. But then when is the right time to have a master's or PhD? And I know we really didn't get into that, but we were trying to focus more on the entry level, getting started with things. And then, of course, we talked about some other alternative things as well.
Yeah, and so I would say that Lindsey's suggestion earlier could be implemented with or without the education path you're talking about, because at any point in time you can just start looking people up.
Yeah.
And ask them out for coffee.
Absolutely.
And then most people have no issues talking about every single aspect, the good, bad, and the ugly, about what it is they do.
And I would even say a less intimidating thing than that is just go to the local meetup. Go on to meetup.com and type in data and see what comes up, and just show up, because then you don't even have to talk to anybody. You can just absorb what it means to be in the data space, and you get free pizza and usually a beer or two afterwards. So it's a great way, and we've of course been in the meetup environment a lot, and we need to get working on our own that we've been working with for a long time, our data science meetup.
Absolutely. Charlie, can I offer another suggestion that we
Sure.
didn't mention? I saw a blog about this the other day. So beyond meetups, I think Slack and Discord are becoming hot areas to meet people and talk to people in data and engineering roles. So I would throw that out there as also another option.
There's got to be a Discord server or two out there.
And there's more than that.
I'm talking good ones, though.
Yeah, totally.
Well, let's end this, because if we're talking education, one of the things that is always a hot topic is the future of education. And so we'll keep this to the 5 or so minutes here, but I think it's a good way to kind of, just encapsulate what we mean by education. But The reason I bring this up is I think data is changing what we do. And first of all, the assessment of credentials is getting easier to do without looking at everything as degrees. So in the past, degrees were the only way that we could judge you if you were educated. And I think there's different ways now to do that. So maybe that changes what we think is an education. But, and then of course, the delivery mechanisms, the online effect of education is real. And so I think there's so much to that. So just in general, what are some of your thoughts of where do you think education is going? And let's not do doom and gloom, but it's going to change. What does change mean?
I think that more types of enrollment are going to be a must in the future. Because we've mentioned YouTube multiple times here.
Sure.
And what is YouTube? It's just pre-programmed content. And you've mentioned to me multiple times in the past that you've recorded hundreds of hours of content specifically for that type of education. And so if you're a traditional, fixed brick and mortar college, you probably got into some sort of online role like in the mid-aughts, or maybe you waited as long as the teens or whatnot. But you really do have to, if you want to have a brand around educating the masses, you're really going to have to have something that competes with YouTube from an education perspective, because I don't need money to get onto YouTube. Yeah. Well, that's a lie. No, that's not a lie, because the library has YouTube.
Oh, because you need the internet is what you're saying.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah. And a computer.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah.
And so
Future of education, Lindsey?
Gosh, this is such a broad question. Maybe this is also another podcast. I think kind of segueing off that a little bit, definitely 4-year traditional education has gotten a lot of criticism, I think, in the past few years. One of my favorite podcasters and economist, Scott Galloway, talks about this all the time. And I think that universities are going to have to rethink their value proposition, right? It's expensive to go to college. It's expensive money-wise. It's also expensive in terms of time.
Yeah.
Particularly when you start talking about comparing a 4-year investment to a 6-month boot camp and get to the same place. So, it kind of gets boiled down a little bit to dollars and cents. And of course, we can talk about the experience piece all we want. I mean, I certainly think that's a component. But I think universities are really going to have to start rethinking their relevancy of how they prepare students for the next step after college.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think that other ways of education are doing it better today. Or at least they're doing it as good for way less money and way less time.
Yep.
And so I guess selfishly, I do think the value is there, but I think that universities haven't spent enough time really either communicating that or changing the way that they structure how they educate and prepare students in order for it to be a great value.
Well, fortunately, Charlie's not alone in his thinking out of the box modality.
I hope so.
And it from what I've seen, there does seem to be a lot of colleges that are very interested in engaging and making sure that what they are delivering is relevant. And
they're thinking about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of, you just have to understand, I went from a public university where there was a lot of students, and the mission is to get people for the state to be ready for a job. And it needs to be a little bit on the quantity side, because that's part of the mission, right? And I love that mission. So that's going to be a different experience than at a private university. And what I've noticed at a private university is they take such a different approach. It's about the whole person. It's about the experience, because it's smaller. You're paying for that, and that experience is different. So what you start to see now that I've gone to a couple of different universities or been in those experiences, both are wonderful, both are different, and both get people to a specific point in their life that they need. And so yes, a public university will be cheaper. And that experience is wonderful. It really is. And here's something I can tell you. Seeing an 18-year-old and then seeing them at 22, I have seen major transformations.
Absolutely.
That doesn't happen in 6 months.
Right.
It doesn't happen in a boot camp. boot camps are really good for, and I'm not saying it doesn't ever. I'm generalizing.
Right.
Because we know people have epiphanies when they're there. But it takes 4 years to mature a lot of times if you're 18 years old. And my 20-year-old, I wouldn't have trusted him to make a lot of decisions yet. My 22-year-old, when he graduated from good old Mississippi State, he was ready for the world. He really was. And a little bit is just age. A little bit of it is experience outside of school, of course. And he had an internship, but something about that maturation process and how it's conducive in a university environment gets people ready just as much. So I'm still pro university. I'm not Mr. Professor that hates it. I think it's an amazing thing. I think, but I do think we need to rethink what we're doing because we are not the ones with all of the knowledge. We are the ones that need to take people on a journey. We are the ones that have to help people from a starting point to a maturation level that is different. And you're going to learn some content. You're going to learn some skills on the way. But that is the least of my concern these days. I want to create a better person.
Yeah.
And that's hard. And I'm not saying higher education's perfect at it. But I also believe that 4-year degrees are not for everybody.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of 18-year-olds that are educated.
Absolutely.
And if you just gave them some skills at the age of 20, they could be just fine. I have 4 kids. All of them, 3 of them have been in college or afterwards now, and I have one about ready to get into college. I don't feel like they are. Maybe that's just because we've sheltered them or they don't have the same life experiences as others. But life experiences can be different for people at different times, and education levels can be different. So there's a lot of 18-year-olds that are ready to take on the world. They just need skills.
Yeah, or 33-year-old.
Or 33-year-old. Or one day when Charlie finally figures it out, he'll be ready for the world just the same.
I'll come around.
You'll absolutely come around. So I think what we've learned today is getting started in the data world is hard. It is hard, and there's a lot of different paths to do that. Find your path. And the best way to do that is to talk to others.
Absolutely.
And that's a starting point. So everybody, we're giving Lindsey's cell number out on air today. No, of course not.
Suddenly get all these texts.
You volunteered, basically.
Well, in all fairness, if anyone is listening to this who is in Nashville or Knoxville, I'm happy to meet you for coffee.
Well, there you
Reach
go.
out to me.
And let me tell you, as somebody that's known Lindsey for a long time, she means that.
Absolutely.
And she has helped a lot of people start their data journey.
Yep. Just don't be creepy.
That's true. That's a good point because that's happened.
You got to go through us first. That's right. You got to go through us before you get to Lindsey.
There's a Charlie and other Charlie screening process
That's
prior
right.
to having coffee.
So Lindsey, is there any parting shots for playing with us here today? But first of all, thank you so much
thank you.
for your time and your insight and just some parting shots for us.
Biggest thing I can say is go after what you want and don't be afraid of failure. You're going to fail. You're going to fail. That is the best teacher, and you keep going. And, all the one piece of, if I could give one piece of advice to anybody, no matter if they're going into data careers or not, is stay uncomfortable.
Nice.
If you stay uncomfortable continually, then you are growing and you are moving toward your goal.
Nice.
Very nice. And with that, Charlie, anything to add?
I just think it's a good time to be involved with data. And so if you're listening to this and you're interested at all, don't think that anything is settled.
That's right.
And you can start today, and that's when this first comes out, or 3 years down the road, and you can be a trendsetter in just a few short years of experience, formal education, and YouTube.
Everybody can be part of the data pathway or data journey that they want to create. And I love that about this field. You can be a data scientist, but you can be a data disciple. We've determined because the other Charlie is a data ninja is what we have figured out. But we don't want anybody else to be a data ninja around here. So only the other Charlie will be the data ninja. But everybody gets to be part of this, and we hope everybody figures out what their data journey is, and hopefully this is a way to get started with that. And so I think that's a great way to end it. Again, thank you so much, Lindsey. And what do you think, Charlie?
had a good time with it.
Excellent. And so, everyone, thanks for listening to the Data for All podcast. I'm Charlie Apigian,
And I'm Charlie Youngman.
and we'll see you next time.